Greetings, I'm Bob Lang from the ABA. We're going to give a couple more minutes for people to get on board, and then we'll start. Give it another 30 seconds, and then we'll get started. Okay, so we're going to start. My name is Bob Lang, and I'm a staff attorney with the American Bar Association's Commission on Immigration, and I want to welcome you to the latest webcast webinar from the ABA section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, and brought to you by the ABA Commission on Immigration. If you like our work, we invite you to become a member of the CRSJ section and collaborate with us on projects you want to develop and offer to our members and the general public. During today's programs, you can ask questions of our panelists by finding the question drop-down box on the right-hand panel and typing in your question. There will be time at the end of our panelists to address them. There will also be polls that will be popping up occasionally on the right-hand side, which you can look at, and the PowerPoint is also available under the handout section, so you can look at that as well. We'll be sharing a recording of this program and relevant materials to anyone who's registered, so you can share it widely with your own networks. Please feel free to leave us feedback and ask questions to follow up. So we're pleased to bring you today's program entitled Understanding and Implementing Security Precautions for Immigration Advocates in an Era of Increasing Fear and Anger. Our panelists today are Huey Thornton, Security Director for the Southern Poverty Law Center, Liz Sweet, Chief of Staff at HIAS, and Dan Andresen, Director of DC Operations for the ABA. I'm going to moderate the program. I'm the supervisor of the ABA's Detainee Hotline, which allows detainees to call us from every detention center in the country. And over the last 9 years, we've had 126 interns, and we often talk about how the difficulty of your advocacy can depend on the client group that you're advocating for. For instance, in the late 1970s, I was advocating for coal miners who were suffering from black lung disease, and our problem was getting the attention of anyone. We didn't get any pushback. There was no one who was against them getting their benefits, but we just couldn't get people's attention. Now, if you're not so lucky if your clients are looked down upon, like, for instance, homeless people, or if you're trying to advocate for needle exchange. Your clients may be ignored, but generally people just want the problem to go away. And so you get some pushback from people who respond negatively because they're offended by your clients. And any assistance, they'll say any assistance you give them will be spent on drugs and alcohol, or intravenous drug users who have brought this upon themselves. And as an advocate, they may say that you're being naive. Advocacy can get more heated when you advocate for a client whose rights run counter to strongly held personal beliefs of a large organized group. For instance, if you were advocating for transsexuals' right to use the bathroom of the gender they identify as, the pushback against your clients can be fierce and angry, and you as an advocate may be personally attacked for insulting their strongly held principles. Unluckiest of all are those of us who are advocating for clients that are vilified. Say, for instance, a group that is characterized as rapists, drug smugglers, and bloodthirsty gang members. As advocates, we not only have to use our creative legal arguments to try and protect their rights, but the pushback can become furious and often violent because people attacking our clients do so from a position of anger and hatred and fear. And the reason for this seminar is when we find ourselves in that position where our clients are vilified, to be able to gauge where we are and where our organization is on preparedness to protect ourselves, our workplace, and our coworkers. So today's panelists are Liz Sweet, who currently serves as Chief of Staff for HIAS and previously served as General Counsel and Chief HR Officer. In that role, she shaped HIAS work on security, including development of policies, trainings, and a new security department for the Global Refugee Protection Organization. Liz has designed programs and managed staff in the implementation of a range of programs serving immigrants and refugees. Prior to her work at HIAS, she worked at Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, where she directed the Access to Justice program and managed pilot alternative to detention initiatives. Her work history involves the development of pro bono immigration legal services programs, both at HIAS and at the American Bar Association, where she worked with me. And her experience includes representation of individual vulnerable immigrants in a range of matters, as well as shaping organizations' rules and systemic litigation and policy work. Huey Thornton is Director of Security for the Southern Poverty Law Center, and in that role, he's responsible for the safety and security of SPLC's personnel and facilities. A key member of the leadership team, he plans, coordinates, and directs all facets of SPLC's protective services. Huey has 29 years of law enforcement experience, previously serving as Chief of Police at Alabama State University, ASU, and as a police major at the Montgomery Police Department in Alabama. He's also a retired U.S. Army Reserve Lieutenant Colonel, and Huey is an internationally board certified protection professional by the American Society for Industrial Security. He's a graduate of the FBI National Training Academy and the Army Command and General Staff College. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Pre-Law from Auburn University Montgomery and a Master of Science in Criminal Justice from Faulkner University. Dan Andresen is the Director of AVA Security and DC Operations. He's responsible for ensuring the safety, security, and appropriate controls and protections of human, property, and fiscal assets on both a domestic and international basis. Dan has an extensive background in the management of critical incidents and has led incident management and crisis management teams responding to natural disasters, political unrest, terrorist attack, and reputational issues. Dan also worked as a security contractor for the Department of State, where he provided security at the residence of the Secretary of State and later the Blair House, which is utilized by official guests of the President of the United States. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan to start taking us through the PowerPoint.
Thank you, Bob. There you go. So today we're going to cover off on a few things. We've already gone through the introductions. So we'll first be looking at identifying threats and various threat groups. We're also going to talk a bit about the basics of physical security and why that's important. And lastly, we'll talk about how is it we respond to incidents and what that should really entail. And then we'll follow this up with an extended question and answer period. It's our desires as the speakers to try to wrap this up at least, 20 minutes or so left in the hour so that we can have a good exchange of ideas and answer some burning questions that you might be facing. So before we get started, we'd like to start off with a polling question. And that polling question is, does your organization employ a full-time security director or manager? And really, the reason why we've inserted polling questions into this presentation, everyone likes to know where they stand amongst their collegial organizations from a benchmarking standpoint, but also you may find that we have a lot more in common than not in terms of the level of resources that we have and those sorts of things. So I'll give everyone an opportunity to respond to that, maybe 30 seconds or so, and then we'll see the results of that, and then we'll push forward with the presentation. Okay, I think people have had enough time.
So the results are in with 11% saying yes, 79% saying no, and 11% saying I don't know.
Excellent. Thank you. Next slide, please. And just to touch on that, so, you know, it's clear that not everyone has a full-time security manager or security director that they can use as a resource, and an individual within an organization with a, you know, a formal security background who addresses these issues for you. My hopes are, as we go through the presentation, that you see that security isn't rocket science, or else I wouldn't be here speaking to you, and that really it comes down to doing the basics and doing them consistently is the key to all this. Next slide. Could we advance to the next slide, please? Thank you. So before we start talking about identifying threats and threat groups, the one thing we got to recognize is that, so what are the elements of a crime? You know, typically there's three factors that need to be in place in order for a crime or significant threat event to occur. And those three factors are: the person carrying out the crime or the action must have the desire or motive to do it. They also must have the ability and means. And lastly, they got to have the opportunity. Now, we can't control whether someone has the desire or ability to, you know, carry out a crime against ourselves or against our organization. But one thing that we do have some control over is whether or not we give them an opportunity to do so. Next slide. So what we're going to do now is identify some threats. And before we do that, the first step in every security project, security plan, policy development, anything like that is a risk assessment. You know, and really it's a combined effort to identify and analyze what potential events negatively impact your organization, your people, your assets, even the environment, and then taking that information and making judgments on what is your tolerability to some of these risks based on the risk analysis. You know, you may consider some influencing factors. You know, for instance, if you are not in a hurricane-prone location, then you're probably not going to be preparing for a hurricane. It just wouldn't make sense. So this is really identifying the events that would have the biggest harm to you and your operations and trying to mitigate them. After we finish the risk assessment, you should have a good handle on what assets you need to protect in order to keep your operations going, and what threats you could face at your office. So the sources of threat. As we all know, we watch the news, we see crazy stuff on the news every day. It's important to remember that sources can be both internal and external to your organization. Some of the examples of external threats could be hate groups, could be sort of a lone wolf type of individual who, for whatever reason, has a beef against your organization. It could be a former employee or employees. It could also be a conspiracy theorist. And, you know, very often these people, for whatever reason, are either easily influenced. There's a lot of social factors that go into this. And sometimes they, have mental illness, which means they don't think as rationally as most other people. And one example of this, although it wasn't an attack per se on a particular organization, was if we can all remember back to the last presidential cycle, there were some rumors floating around on the internet that Hillary Clinton and her campaign manager, John Podesta, had a child sex ring that was present, that they ran in the basement of a well-known pizza shop in Washington, D.C. And a young man from North Carolina who had been getting on the internet and stumbled across this and decided he was going to rescue these children, drove up to Washington, D.C. with an assault rifle, went into the pizzeria, and started firing shots at the floor in an effort to rescue the children that were supposed to have been in the caught up into the sex ring. Now, most of us would not even entertain the idea that any of these dots could actually be connected. They're so far-fetched, but it just goes to show that bits of information and various social factors do impact people's rationale, and sometimes they act out. So we certainly must protect ourselves against that. Not to be overlooked are the internal factors of threats or sources of threats that we got to be mindful of, and sometimes those come into the form of disgruntled employees who do malicious things in the workplace to spite everyone. It could be workplace violence, but one not to be overlooked, and I have it an asterisk beside it, is domestic violence. And the reason I did that is it's sort of arguable whether that's an internal event or external. But certainly, this does happen. Disgruntled spouses or significant others, boyfriends, girlfriends come into the office, and sometimes with serious malicious intent on harming a particular individual. So those are just some examples. Next slide. So some forms of threats that are out there. They run the gamut. It could be harassment, and that harassment can come in a variety of forms these days. It could be online harassment. It could be telephonic, people phoning into the office and shouting obscenities and making threats. It could be people in person coming to your office to show their displeasure for whatever it is your organization might be doing. It could come in the form of vandalism, assault, and some of the worst case scenarios, shootings. The ABA has a large office in Texas, and it's focused on providing advocacy to unaccompanied minors into the U.S., and that is a real concern that we have. Someone who doesn't necessarily support that type of work coming up to our office and attempting to sort of shoot the place up. So we've taken steps to mitigate that. And then last, this is fairly new, the term doxing. and that is essentially people getting on the internet to try to uncover whatever they can about you, getting your phone numbers, your address, and making it public to other people, and doing so with malicious intent, hoping that these people show up at your house or something like that. So these are all things that we must bear in mind, and I can't underscore the importance to, when these events occur, to one, document them, and two, report them to law enforcement authorities. There are a number of different task force, whether they be state task force, regional task force, or even federal task force, that are out there to combat hate crimes and hate speech. And Huey can talk more about this later, but more often than not, the earlier you involve them, the earlier they can take action. And it may be that they actually track down who's calling your office every day, and they go knock on their door and question them over this. And if they're able to do that early on when these things occur, it's more likely that things aren't going to escalate. Whereas if you started to continuously get these phone calls from the same person and nothing's done about it, that person might get bored and sort of up the ante and start taking more significant action against you or your people. So that's what we're trying to avoid. Next slide. Huey?
I'm just trying to make sure I'm unmuted here. Good afternoon. It's great to be here with you this evening, or this afternoon. And, here at Southern Poverty Law Center, next slide, please. Here at Southern Poverty Law Center, security, physical security in particular, is something that we take very seriously. It's something that we've been doing for many years. And, whether it's here at our headquarters, which has somewhat of a high threat profile, or whether it's at one of our local offices that are out in the middle of nowhere, where we actually provide pro bono care for immigrants who are in the immigration detention facilities, which are, most of them are out, in the middle of some rural areas in southeast Georgia and places like that. Security, this idea of layered protection is something that we use in those locations as well as here at our headquarters. It's a concept that works well, whether it's a small security operation or whether it's a large security operation like we have here at our headquarters. When we go out and do a threat assessment or a site survey of one of our locations, this is something that we look at, and we look at it from the perspective of starting at the perimeter and seeing what we can do to make our facility a more hardened target. Because in my close to 30 years of public safety work, there's one thing that's been constant. Those who intend on carrying out some sort of malicious intent are looking for opportunities that are going to provide them the least chance of being caught, the least chance of being detected, and the highest chance of them actually carrying out whatever malicious act it is they're intending on carrying out. And so anything that we can do to make ourselves appear as a more hardened target will lessen our chances of being victimized. And we have to look at it from the perimeter into the building. When we look at the perimeter, like I said, we look at things like if there's a fence there that can help delay someone from carrying out an attack, or in some cases, if there's a ditch in front of the building to prevent, cars from driving straight in and maybe into your building, or to basically funnel them through the main access point that we would like for vehicles to come through. Lighting to make sure that, at nighttime, because typically in the winter months, our employees are leaving after dark, making sure that it's well lit. At our building, making sure that it doesn't appear as a soft target by having cameras up, having badge readers on the door, having alarm signs out front, having signs indicating that the surveillance system is in operation at this particular location. All of these type security elements can help reduce the chances of you being victimized. And then when we move into the office, we always make sure that at all of our locations there's access control on the door, and that there's a camera pointing at the door so that the person who's inside can see who's coming to the door. And one of the things that we also do is we have a system called a pre-announcement system, where as much as possible we get pre-announcements on people who are coming to the office, so that we can kind of eliminate them as being suspicious. And that way the person who's actually answering the door will use a higher degree of caution when they're answering the door for someone who they're not expecting. Something else that we employ a lot, employ at least in all of our office spaces, is we have safe rooms for our employees. And basically what this involves is we'll dedicate a room in the building. It has to have 4 walls, and we'll actually have a hardened door placed on that particular location, and a peephole so that they can look outside and see, if there's anything going on once, if there is an event to where someone has breached the security, and maybe they're an active assailant, or where they're actively shooting or killing someone. Our employees can get into this space and at least delay the person from continuing his or her attack. And it says here our assets that we're protecting are our people, and we also incorporate our people into our scheme of security. Whereas all of our people have a level of security awareness that you don't see in other locations, because we train them and we bring them in from day one in an environment to where they understand that security is something that is not just the responsibility of the security department. It's the responsibility of everyone who works at Southern Poverty Law Center to exercise security awareness and to be on the lookout for anything that may appear suspicious and report it as soon as possible to security so that we can deal with it. Next slide, please. This concept of the 4D network is basically protective security measures that are used in our industry, and it's been proven that these 4Ds can help mitigate an offense if we ever have one. For instance, if you look at deter, that's one of the things that we place a strong emphasis on here at Southern Poverty Law Center, is doing everything that we can do to deter an attack. And we do that through implementing a huge number of preventative measures that basically, will show a person who intend on carrying out an attack on our facility that this is not a soft target. We start, like I said earlier, with our security, and we have what we call concentric security, whereas there are bands of security or layers of security, and it starts with our camera system, where we can see out for a long distance away from our building with our camera system, so that we can see what's going on. And we have multiple cameras around our facility, so that anyone who comes up will see that this facility is under heavy surveillance. And then as you move in closer to the building, we have armed security guards at the front of our building. And then as you move up to the building, we have access control on the doors. And then once you get inside our building, you have to actually go through a scan where you actually scan. You'll run through a metal detector, and then we have access control before you can actually get into the building. And I know that in most cases, most operations they're not going to be at this level, but security is scalable. And there are just so many new security equipment, so much new security equipment out there now, to where, even an organization who doesn't have like a large budget can use, camera systems that are available at Lowe's to where you can hook it up. We're actually using, some of those systems at some of our offices that are out in rural areas that we can actually place at the door, and I can actually monitor them here in Montgomery. And the camera is somewhere like in Alexandria, Louisiana, but I can monitor that camera and see what's going on at the front door of our building in Alexandria, Louisiana. Those are just some of the things that we can do to deter criminal activity. And then, like I said, with our surveillance system, we're able to detect a crime a good distance away from the building. And then also, like I said earlier, we use our employees as they're out walking around or they're in the area of the building. They're trained to be on the lookout for anything that may look like it's suspicious. We train them on a concept called the 8 signs of terrorism, and these are 8 signs that typically are present before any type of attack occur on a facility. And so all of them, they're all trained on that. And then when you look at delay, we have access control on our doors, like I said earlier. All of the equipment we have roll into these 4Ds. And then, if there is a situation where security is breached to the point where unfortunately we have to defend, ourselves and our facility, then our guards are trained to defend themselves, and our employees are told, are trained at least during their orientation that there may come a point where you may have to defend yourself. And if that does happen, then, it's one of those deals where you have to fight for your life, and you have to be prepared to use anything that you have available to you to defend yourself. Next slide, please. These are some of the fundamental elements we use in physical security here at Southern Poverty Law Center. With our barriers, like I said earlier, it could be something as simple as having a ditch, which, in primitive times they used moats as barriers to keep, the enemy from actually breaching their security. And, that's something, that's a concept that's still viable today in some cases, where you want to basically guide someone to a certain location to maybe enter at a main entrance. And it serves as a deterrent. We use fences. We use barriers heavily here in Montgomery because we're on a city block, and people can drive right up to our building. So we use barriers to make sure they can't get in, and at our storefront locations and places where you don't have a large distance between your outer perimeter, it may become necessary to actually use bollards so that someone can't drive, a device into your building. These are all used for delaying. Access control is something that we use too at all of our locations to make sure that someone can't just walk up and walk into our buildings. We use magnetic, locks that our employees can open from their desk, and we also use cameras as a part of our access control to make sure that someone just don't walk up off the street and walk in and do something malicious without at least us having an opportunity to react to it. Alarm systems, we use them on our buildings, and we also have at all of our reception stations, we have a panic alarm that we utilize in order to give our receptionists an opportunity, if we do have a significant event, to activate that panic alarm. And what it does is it sets off the audible alarm at the building, because, like I said, in most cases, these individuals, they don't want to be seen they don't want to be caught. So if an alarm goes off, then more than likely they're going to move on. And then we have a security force. We actually have security officers here at our location in Montgomery 24 hours of the day, as well as some of our protected residences and our Atlanta office, where the threat profile has been proven high enough to where we actually need this level of security. Next slide, please. This is a common layout, and this more than likely will be for a lot of the organizations that are storefront or standalone buildings. This is just kind of like an idea of what you should have in regards to physical security for your location. When you look at it, you can see that that at the entrance here, there's a mag lock that's on the door that can be controlled by the receptionist. And like I said, in most cases, it's a good idea to have a camera, even if it's one of the $100 cameras from Lowe's that you can go out and buy, one of the Ring systems that you can go out and buy and provide to your receptionist, and they can actually see the face of the individual who's at the door and determine if it's someone you're expecting or maybe not expecting, and so you can handle it with the level of, security that it should be handled at. Then you have, like, inside the building, it's a good idea to have some sort of separation between your receptionist and your actual main building. And for us, and just like here, we actually have access control on the main doors that go into our building, which is a great idea. And, that can be controlled by a badge that maybe is issued by the receptionist at the front door if this person is allowed unescorted access, or if they have to be escorted by someone, then the person who's escorting them will have to come up to the lobby and actually gather that person and take them into the building with them. We have what we call escorted and unescorted access to all of our facilities. Typically, our unescorted access is only granted to trusted visitors and vendors that we deal with on a routine basis. And then when you move into the building, you can see that, it's laid out to where you have meeting rooms and staff lounges. And what we typically do is, like, our restrooms are all enclosed. We will make our restrooms on our floors the safe room, and we'll equip it with a heavy-duty lock, deadlock, that keyed lock that is keyed from, keyed to where you can unlock and lock it. And then we also have, like, a peephole so that the employees can look out to see if the person who maybe is committing the offense is still in the area. Next slide, please. Okay, I think that covers my area for now, and I will be followed by Liz with responding to incidents.
Thanks, Huey. So yes, I'm going to briefly go through 3 topics. I'm going to speak about responding to incidents, staff training, and about policies to be prepared for incidents. So next slide, please. And I believe we have a polling question. So have your staff been trained on how to respond to a security incident? So if you can just take a moment to answer yes or no on that, and then we'll share back the results. All right, let's go ahead and see how many. Okay, so it looks as though 43% have said yes, which is good, but that leaves a significant percentage of the folks on this call who have not had this kind of training. So let's go ahead to the next slide and talk a little bit about responding to incidents. And so we've listed out some of the kinds of incidents that you may want to be thinking about how to prepare for. And some of these relate to material that Dan already covered, but a bomb threat certainly is a type of incident to be prepared for. An actual active shooter, a building evacuation, suspicious mail, and telephonic threats. And so for all of these, it's worth thinking through what are your incident reporting mechanisms within your organization. So both ensuring that staff know when something rises to, the level where that's necessary, knowing that they need to reach out to law enforcement, need to call 911, but also thinking through how decision-making happens in incidents. Who needs to be notified and who's going to make those decisions. Having thought that through in advance is going to help things run a lot more smoothly. Dan already spoke about the importance of law enforcement's role and communicating with law enforcement. And I really want to take a moment to emphasize this because there are resources out there to help you navigate, particularly if you actually receive threats, to reach out to law enforcement and share that information with them. And I thought that it would be a nice opportunity to ask Huey and Dan if they have any particular tips on reaching out to law enforcement and who to reach out to and how to present some of this.
Go ahead, Huey.
Okay. I would say it's very important to have a good relationship with your local law enforcement agency, or to try at least and have a good relationship with them. We have a great relationship with them, but also in all areas of this country, there's a joint terrorism task force. That's the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. That's their primary responsibility and job is to identify and respond to any particular incidents of terrorism or domestic terrorist type activity. And they would much rather be on the preventative end of it, to where you're providing them information to prevent an attack than to have to deal with responding to one. So I would definitely recommend finding out who the Joint Terrorism Task Force representative is for your particular area and reaching out to them. And maybe even if you have a bunch of activities surrounding threats or threatening activity, setting up some sort of standing meeting with this person. That's exactly what we do.
That's great. Thank you. And so, law enforcement. Oh,
I'm sorry.
Please.
I'm sorry, Liz. I'll add one more thing. So, in some of my previous roles, one thing that we also did, just to reconfirm what Huey said about having a good working relationship, particularly with local law enforcement. In some instances, we invited the SWAT team or the Special Reaction Team to come to our facility and train in the evenings to run through scenarios. They enjoy the training. It's a change of venue. But the upshot for that is if they ever have to respond to your location, they know the location.
Exactly.
So it means that
and one other organization I'd also like to put out there is the Fusion Center. And I know here in the state of Alabama, we have like a Fusion Center. And they take in all the information pertaining to threats, and then they also send it out to law enforcement agencies. So it may even be that it's more receptive to law enforcement agencies if it's coming from the Fusion Center, as opposed to from the organization directly.
Great, thank you. And so I really just had wanted to especially make the point here that in terms of responding to incidents or planning for incidents, you do have resources available to you, even if you're a very small organization without a security manager, reaching out to your local law enforcement. And then the other resource that I wanted to flag is that we all have some type of insurance. And so reaching out to your insurance agent and talking to them it is in their interest to help you minimize and mitigate your risk. So some insurance agents are able to help with various aspects of this. So that's just one other place to look for some expertise and support. So next slide, please. So we have a couple of polling questions here, and I'm not sure how they'll, oh great, so we'll start with the first one. Does your organization have a safety and security management plan or policies in place right now? And we have the options of yes, no, or I don't know. So if you can respond to that, get some sense of the other organizations. So let's go ahead and see those results. Okay, and so we only have 36% of folks saying yes in response to this, and about 39% saying no, and a significant number saying I don't know, which is a little bit of concern, of course, because policies, especially in this area, are only as good as the training, which we will get to in just a moment. Next slide, please. Okay, and we had another polling question. Let's go ahead and do this one, and then we might skip the third given the time. So do you and your staff know who to report a security incident to? Yes, definitely. Generally, yes. No, or unsure. So please select one of those options. And let's go ahead and take a look at those results. Again, we're trying to leave some time for questions here. Okay, so a little bit higher of a favorable response on that. More of you saying yes. The majority of you saying generally yes. So a little bit of uncertainty there. And then some people saying no or unsure. Great. So let's go on to the next slide. And let's go ahead and skip this polling question given time. And so move forward to the next slide. Great. And so here, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but what we've listed are some of the pieces that you may want to be thinking about in terms of building a safety and security management plan or strengthening yours. So thinking about incident management, perhaps having a template to report incidents or document them, particularly if you're documenting threats that have come in, to track them over time. An access control policy. Policies around staff travel. This can be an area of greater vulnerability for some organizations or organizations that are more present in the public outside of your office. You may want to have other considerations in the policy in that situation. You may want to think about a policy or plan for security training for your staff, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. You may want to have an advanced crisis management plan, identifying who may have responsibility in a crisis and be empowered to make decisions in a crisis. And then emergency guidelines are incredibly important in this context, to have thought through in advance how you would act in an emergency and having contact information that's organized and accessible. And then also flagging that risk assessments, which were talked about earlier, are another key dimension related to your policy structure. And for some organizations, you may want to think about some kind of regular frequency of conducting risk assessments on your organization or on particular parts of your organization where you may have higher risk. And then thinking about whether some of those risks might need to be reported or having some kind of structure for how to manage the results of those risk assessments. And then finally, just flagging that your emergency response plan or sort of overall continuity of operations plan is also an important component here. So next slide, please. And then finally, I wanted to take just a moment to talk about staff training, because for all of this, advanced preparation really is what's going to make the difference. and there are some different types of training you might want to consider offering. So we've listed here emergency preparedness, personal security. So Huey talked about people being able to defend themselves, and that's what that's speaking to, whether you want to give some type of actual personal security tips and training. Active shooter trainings, these unfortunately are becoming something that a lot more of our organizations are conducting. And then training on organizational policies, and in particular thinking about training for staff who are going to be interacting more with the public or opening mail, to make sure that they know what kinds of things they should be thinking about and what to do in certain scenarios. And when I did want to flag that when you think about training, there's a lot of different methods that you can use, from one-to-one conversations with a supervisor, walking through with a staff person who opens the mail, for example, what to look for in terms of suspicious packages. But there's also online videos that are available that staff can access. There's opportunities to do group or full staff training and bring in a trainer and actually walk through some of these, especially on the policy side. Or there's actually conducting a scenario exercise where people learn how to respond and react in a situation. And so all of these can be great approaches, and you have to think about what is going to suit your resources. And so with that, I do want to stop, and we're at least leaving 10 more minutes for questions. So if you want to go to the next slide.
Okay, thank you. So there are a couple questions that I wanted to run by the panelists, and one of them is, for a small organization with a limited budget, what is the step that you would think gives the biggest bang for the buck in protecting the organization?
I'll be happy to take a stab at that. There are lots of qualified security consultants out there. I would encourage folks to engage someone, if they don't have the in-house expertise, to conduct a walkthrough of their facilities and make recommendations as to what they can do to harden those facilities. The important part here is, once you get that report, you're not over. You got to go through and actually implement the things. And if you make it very clear with the consultant from the onset that, you're not Microsoft, you don't have billions of dollars, but you need solutions that work, they're out there.
Okay. Huey, did you have anything on that?
Yeah, I would say that, like I said earlier, anything that you can bring to bear that gives the appearance that your facility is hardened will definitely decrease your chances of being victimized. And I've had situations where we've dealt with organizations that didn't have very much money at all, and we recommended them a $300 or $400 camera system from Sam's or somewhere like that. With those cameras hanging up there, and maybe hang a few dummy cameras up next to them so that they don't know which ones are working. Locks are not that expensive on your doors, signage, alarm signage, surveillance signage. Anything that you can do to give the appearance that your organization is not a soft target will definitely decrease your chances of being victimized.
Okay, thank you. And then a question is, when a threat is recognized, for instance, by the receptionist, I know there's a debate over whether not to use what used to be the old-fashioned way of having a code red, code black, something. And is the thinking recently that you should use codes, or just a straightforward language like active shooter in the office, take cover?
Well, I just finished some training on that a couple of days ago, and the thing now is that the security industry is getting away from using code and just using common language, because you can train your people and train your people and train your people, but you're always going to have some who just don't listen. And the last thing you want to do is have someone there scratching their head trying to figure out what a code is.
Yeah, that's true enough. And someone had mentioned, like, the receptionist having the camera so that they can see an unexpected visitor. And I was thinking, well, one of the questions is, what kind of mannerisms might the receptionist recognize to raise their concerns about a possible threat?
I can take that. We typically train our employees on looking for what they call the 8 signs of terrorism, where you're looking for someone who maybe is giving the appearance that they're conducting surveillance, maybe have a camera or, looking, at looking at an area maybe they shouldn't be, or elicitation where they're asking questions about specific individuals or key individuals at your organization, or maybe even trying to test your security by trying to walk in behind employees. And then it goes on to talking about finances and looking at, potential acquiring supplies or people who just don't look like they belong. These are the type of people that we tell our people to look for. And then we have specific threat individuals who, our intelligence department are constantly monitoring, and they give us information on them. And so we look at what type of paraphernalia they may wear, or tattoos or anything like that may give us an indication that these are the individuals who are the bad guys. And we share that information with our employees as well.
Okay, and then a question on, if you're working for an organization that may itself be a target for people who would threaten it, are there any specific types of steps that you might take regarding your social media and your online presence?
Well, someone had mentioned the doxing. That's not uncommon in today's environment. We always try to make sure that our employees keep their personal social media presence and social media activities separate from their business social media activities, because what ends up happening is not only is that particular person victimized, but all of their close relatives and friends and people like that who they deal with on the personal side run a risk of being the victim of a doxing as well, because we've had that happen. And so, we always say that it's very important not to give any information about your work or where you work or anything like that could help someone, in the furtherance of a crime against you.
I would agree with that. And
go ahead, Liz.
I was just going to say, I very much agree with that, and to both separate and also for people to think about what level of privacy controls they're using on all of their social media, and in particularly anything that's going to connect them to a location. That's something that they may want to be particularly thoughtful about. It's also worth looking, if you do work with an organization that might be a higher target, looking at, for example, whether you can pull some identifying information or location details off of public websites or your organization's social media platform also.
Hey, Dan, did you have something to add?
I did. Some of the things that one can do is, one, don't have any signage for your facility. If you are at risk of, you don't want people to know, and don't want to encourage people to come knocking on your door to vent or complain. The other thing too is when you're holding events, that you make sure you know who is on the invitee list and make sure they're vetted. I can tell you that we've had experiences in the past whereby there was some training that was being led for other advocates from other organizations and the media. There was a prominent national media reporter that sort of snuck in and was acting like he wasn't a reporter. and he was ferreted out rather quickly and escorted out. So it's important to limit information to the people that need to know as well.
I agree with Dan. Those are all practices we use as well.
Okay, so our time is up, and I wanted to just say in conclusion that I want to thank the panelists for their insights and for the questions, and then I just want to finish by saying that for more than 5 decades, the ABA's section of Civil Rights and Social Justice has worked on hundreds of issues addressing a broad range of civil rights, civil liberties, and international human rights. Today, the section continues to promote policies affecting religious freedom, LGBT rights, gender equality, and other significant civil rights issues. So please consider making a donation to our section at donate.americanbar.org/CRSJ, and your gift will help make our efforts possible for decades to come. And in closing, to quote from the old police show, be safe out there. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.